Welcome. Thank you for coming today. My name is Jess, and I've been the person who's been emailing you with details about this workshop. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ivana to cover some information about the Office of Sustainability.
Hi there. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's so great to have such an excited group about some of the topics we've been covering lately at the Sustainability Academy. And I hope that this webinar finds you and your families well. My name is Ivana, as Jess mentioned, and along with Jess, I co-lead the Sustainability Academy program. And before we launch into the workshop, I wanted to give a little bit of background on the program and some additional resources that you might find interesting or useful from our office. So this workshop is brought to you by the San Mateo County Office of Sustainability. And the mission of our office is to build a sustainable community that fulfills the needs of the present and the future. Our office has a number of programs and projects that you might find useful. Our Home for All program provides, it's really an initiative to develop a broad array of housing stock throughout the county. This is more targeted towards cities and city staff, but it's a really wonderful initiative nevertheless. Our active transportation program actually has an active transportation plan that's being updated right now. And so if you're interested in more active modes of getting around, biking, walking, etc., check that out. It's a really interesting plan and is open for resident input right now. Our Climate Ready San Mateo County initiative is two-pronged. It's about helping jurisdictions throughout the county prepare for the impacts of climate change, as well as reducing our emissions. And this is actually another project that I lead, the San Mateo County Unincorporated Climate Action Plan, which is also in the process of being updated. So if you're interested, I encourage you to visit our website and weigh in and actually tune into some workshops that we have coming up at the end of June. Moving on, our Green Business Program is geared towards small businesses, small to medium-sized businesses, and helping them improve their environmental green practices. And we provide support for certifying those green businesses. Moving on down, the Bay Area Regional Energy Network program has a number of resources that lots of residents here might find useful. Even if you're a tenant, a multifamily property owner, or a homeowner, we have all kinds of rebates and incentives and resources to help you reduce your electricity and water bill at home. Peninsula Clean Energy is something you may be familiar with. It spun out of our office and is now a fully functioning utility. It procures or purchases on behalf of all residents cleaner energy than PG&E and at lower cost. Our waste reduction program, which I'll cover last, provides a number of resources and programs for folks to improve their waste practices at home, reduce the amount of solid waste you produce. So we have a hotline, and you can call that anytime, even now, about questions about recycling, composting, reuse, where to donate things. We have schools programs, and so we're helping equip teachers, and we send teachers into schools. We have a community garden program and a grant program, which you might find interesting as well. So if you have any questions about that, I encourage you to go to our website and learn more. I'll give a little bit more detail about the Sustainability Academy, because this is the program that brings you this workshop. The Sustainability Academy provides free education to raise awareness about social and environmental issues. Its goal is to empower residents to take agency on their lives relating to environmental issues and questions that come up. And another goal is to build community leadership through experiential education. This is easier done when we're not dealing with a global pandemic, getting people together, learning together, but we can still do that from a distance. The program offers a number of different kinds of workshops and field trips. Of course, all of these are contingent on COVID, but we have and still do offer workshops on a variety of topics, including home composting, herb gardening, non-toxic cleaning, and mending. So I encourage you to sign up for our listserv if you're not already on it, so that you're aware of new workshops coming out, which come out all the time. The next program or the next kind of sub-program within this Sustainability Academy is the workshops and garden that we have going at Maple Street Jail in partnership with the nonprofit Planting Justice. It's basically a two-element program where we work with inmates in a garden outside, and we planted a garden, edible garden, for the first time just this past year, and we do holistic wellness and waste reduction workshops within the jail. The last two courses that I'll cover might interest you since you're here at this workshop. We have a Master Composter course, which is 6 weeks long and covers a number of different topics relating to composting, including backyard and worm composting, soil biodiversity, and in general, solid waste reduction practices. This is a fun class, and it ends with a student presentation of knowledge and a potluck. And when you're finished, you're a master composter and you join this community of active composters. It's really fun. The last class I'll touch on is our Master in Local Sustainability class. It's 9 weeks long, and it focuses on topics from climate change to environmental justice, energy, waste reduction, food systems, and transportation. And the registration for this class is actually open now. It starts on June 6th. And actually, the Master Composter class, I forgot to mention, starts in the fall. So if you're interested, keep your eyes open for registration starting later this year. We also have socials, which of course are on hold because of COVID, but just giving you a sense of the kinds of things that we do together. It's really fun. The Academy team, I'll transition into introducing the team. We have a number of different instructors: Jesus Jimenez, Camille Lang is our volunteer coordinator, Todd Sutton and Joe Lees are both composting instructors, and Jeannie Pham teaches herb gardening and mending. And last, I'll transition to introducing your instructor for today, Mary Coe. Mary Coe has 40 years of professional baking experience. She served as head pastry chef at prominent local bakeries, operated wedding cake businesses, instructed pastry and breads classes at the California Culinary Academy and the San Francisco Baking Institute, and she's currently an independent baking consultant. So I was looking at this photo earlier and just could not figure out how one can possibly make a cake like that. It's super, super impressive. So with that, I'll transition to Mary Coe and let her take it away. Thank you all again for being here.
Thanks, Ivana. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I am so happy that so many of you are choosing to spend an hour or so this morning to learn some ways that some of the ingredients that you actually have on hand can be used to create like a variety of pastries. As you probably know, baking is having a moment right now. I think a lot of people are discovering like the joy and the comfort that baking can provide in sort of an uncertain time as we're all experiencing right now. Today, though, we are going to be exploring two applications of a few bakery products, specifically short dough and a sourdough. Both of the products can be used as a vehicle to use ingredients that you already have on hand to create like a variety of baked goods. And I just wanted to add as a side note that I honestly did not go out and buy any special products for today at all. I completely used like little half bags of coconut that I had in the fridge, or the end of some trail mix, or a few chocolate chips that I had in the back of the cupboard. So nothing was bought for the purpose of this workshop. So it just sort of shows you the variety of pastries that you can make on what you have at home. What I'm going to do now is focus the camera down into the work area, and then I'll get ready to get started. Okay, hopefully it's going to be a good view. So we're going to start out with the short dough. Short dough is actually a really versatile dough that can be made up in a lot of different ways. It's sort of like one of the mainstays of the pastry kitchen. Today, we're going to be using it specifically for cookies, for tarts, and for actually homemade Pop-Tarts, which are a lot of fun. But the first thing I want to do is show you how to mix the dough. Let me just introduce the products to you first that are going to be going into the short dough. First of all, we have flour, and I put the salt already in here. We have butter. We have a little bit of sugar, and we have egg, and we have some vanilla. Okay, so if you're looking at these products and you've done a fair amount of baking, think of like, you know, basically like a cookie dough. The one thing that you're probably noticing that's missing is any sort of chemical leavening. There's no baking soda, there's no baking powder. So right away, that's telling us that we don't want a lot of rise out of this product. We want it to be, you know, really the shape that we roll it out in, that is the shape that we want it to remain. So that goes for natural leavening too. Natural leavening, one of the ways we would naturally leaven something is by incorporating a lot of air during the mixing process. We don't want to do that. So this is going to be a basic creaming method, just as you would like a normal, say, chocolate chip cookie dough. So I'm just going to soften up the butter first. And I don't have the sugar in here yet. Once we add the sugar, it's just naturally going to start adding more air into the product, which we do not want. We don't want that natural leavening. Okay. So as soon as this is really pretty soft here, it was fairly hard when I put it in, so I might need a little bit more. Just make sure when you do scrape down the mixer periodically that you get the paddle as well. A lot of chunks of butter can end up there. Okay, so next is going to be the sugar. Not a huge amount of sugar actually in short dough, which is actually one of the reasons that I like it too. It is definitely a sweet dough. It would not be good for savory applications, but that said, it is not one of your super sweet doughs. So it's not overwhelmingly sweet. So what we're looking for now is just the sugar to become incorporated in your butter. Okay, as soon as that happens, we want to stop. It's better to err on the side of caution and just stop every once in a while, scrape it down. Make sure there's no sugar hanging out on the bottom of the bowl. Believe it or not, we have like entire courses on mixing methods. So it might be like a little bit detailed, but it's like super important the way that you mix products. Everything is just one of the basic building blocks. Okay, so there's a tiny bit of sugar left on the bottom, so I'm just gonna run it a little bit more. Okay, and at this point, let me just show you. Okay, you can see it's really completely incorporated in there. The butter is still a little bit firm, which is fine as long as the sugar is completely incorporated and there's no sugar on the bottom of the bowl. Okay, so that's what we're looking for in this case. If we were making a creaming method cookie, we would just go straight ahead and probably mix this for another minute or so easily, but that's because we want some chemical leavening in there. Okay. At this point, just as if we were making cookies, typical creaming method, we're going to be adding the egg. And we're going to be adding a little bit of vanilla. And again, we're looking for this to become incorporated. Stopping the machine periodically to scrape it down to make sure there's no lumps in there that are not incorporated. At this point, depending upon how cold your butter actually is, you might end up with, you know, maybe even sort of a cottage cheesy look. It doesn't happen all the time. It only happens if your butter's super cold. This time it's not happening. If it does happen, really don't worry about it. As long as everything is incorporated, when you add your dry ingredients, it's going to come right together. So not a big deal. Okay, again, as soon as it's incorporated, I'm just holding off. And just to show you the appearance of this, hopefully you can see that. It's got a tiny bit of cottage cheesy look to it. Again, that's fine. Just scrape it down one more time to make sure there's no ingredients lurking anywhere that aren't incorporated. And then finally, we're going to be adding the salt and the flour. This is an all-purpose flour that I'm using, and we are going to be sending out the recipes. I think it's going to be on Tuesday after the holiday weekend. So I'm not giving you amounts right now, but you will be receiving all of those recipes. Okay, obviously, we're going to be starting this on a low speed. As it becomes incorporated, you can up the speed a little bit, but because we do not want to aerate this at all for any leavening, we're not going to be putting it up any higher. The one thing that I want to show you, which is a little bit different than those of you who have made, say, cookies before. At this point in mixing cookies, this would probably already be completely incorporated. It would not have this dry look as it has right now. This is totally normal. Okay, for a short dough. So we're just having it at this point on slow speed. We don't want the gluten to build up or develop. And you can probably see the dough is starting to come together right now, okay? You can see all of my ingredients are incorporated. I'm just gonna turn it off.
Hey Mary,
some of the flour might not be totally incorporated, but as I said, we don't wanna overdo it. And so at this point, it is really better to simply finish what we have to do on the counter. Okay, so I'm just going to turn this out on the counter. Yeah.
Mary, could I interject with a question?
And knead that a few times. Okay. So that's a really nice short dough there. This is a great recipe that I've used for ages and ages, and it's sort of a foolproof recipe. At this point, I really like to form it into a disc, wrap it up so it doesn't dry out. Usually like a plastic wrap would be best for that. You can use foil, and put it in the fridge for an hour or so, just to let the butter firm up a little bit. I actually had some already in the fridge, so we can just go straight ahead and start using this one.
Mary, could I interject with a question?
Yes.
A couple of people were asking about whether or not they could mix the dough without a KitchenAid mixer and by hand in some way.
Yeah, you definitely can. If you do that, what I would definitely do is start with a butter that is really room temperature. Because this is, you know, a dough that is not going to be overmixed to start with, you can definitely do this just by hand. No problem at all. As you can see, I mean, it's really something, as I said, you don't want to overmix anyway. So it's super easy to do it. You're basically just combining the ingredients with each step.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so when you take it out of the fridge, you usually want to just work it a tiny bit before you actually start rolling it out. There's some parts of the dough that are going to be a little bit cooler than others, and you don't want to overwork it at this point, but you want to just get a really nice, flexible, smooth dough to start rolling out. And let's see. So what we're going to be starting with today are just simple cookies. I'm going to show you 3 different kinds of pretty simple cookies with this. Make sure that you put your flour down. That is the super important part with this. And when you're rolling out, you want to go ahead and roll it out a little bit one way, rotate it, make sure each time that you're going to have some flour underneath. Okay. Again, make sure there's flour. And you're looking at getting this probably close to, I would say, a quarter of an inch thick, depending on the application. Okay, but it is really important, as I said, to continually rotate this because it does have a tendency, because of the butter, to stick. Okay. So, just gonna get a cookie sheet. Okay, so we're gonna start with the simplest first, and all I have is like a fluted cookie cutter right here. What we're gonna be doing with these is eventually, once they're baked, to just sort of use them as like little sandwich cookies, and you can fill them with whatever you have on hand. If you have leftover jam in the fridge, if you have, you know, say a jar of salted caramel, you know, ice cream topping, if you have a nut butter, any of those things are going to be, you know, great fillings for these. You do not need anything fancy. So usually, just to let you know, I would normally bake things of similar shape and similar size on the same tray. I would not put different size things on the same tray, but because of my limited number of trays at home, I'm going to be putting the cookies on one tray, but just make sure that you split them up when you do the baking. Okay, so that's going to be just the simple cutout cookies. Second one we're going to be doing, we're just going to reutilize some of this dough. We are going to make some twists. Okay, so you just want to make sure that your dough is really nice and firm. And when I'm rolling this out, I'm going to be rolling it out into like a rope. You want to make sure really that the flour is up off of the table, because you really do want it sticking a tiny bit. If you're rolling this around on the flour, you're going to get a really inconsistent product. Just much easier to have that tiny bit of stick for this one. So we're looking at this getting to approximately the size of maybe a pencil, maybe a little bit thicker than that, not too much. Remember, we didn't put any leavening in this, and there's no natural leavening either. What that means is pretty much the shape and size we put on the pan, that is what we're going to have when it's done. Okay. So that's about good. So you just want to cut some, equal pieces. I usually use a bench scraper as a way to measure off equal pieces. They don't have to be consistent, but it looks nice when they are. Just cut through there. Okay, just roll it out a tiny bit more. And then we're just going to take these and twist. Okay, the good thing, I mean, these are pretty basic cookies. This is a really delicious dough. So it actually is quite nice to just have it on its own like this. But I did these because it can be a good way to use up like random kinds of sugar you have to sprinkle on top that you don't necessarily have enough for anything else. So we've got these little guys. And I'm just going to put, I've got a little bit of turbinado sugar left. So I'm just going to put some of that on. And those will go straight on the sheet pan as well. Okay.
Mary, may I ask another question related to the cookies on the sheet?
What's that?
We had a question come in about whether the cookies would stick because of all of the butter in the recipe and if we should use parchment.
No, it's a really great question. Some cookies you would need to really worry about that. This recipe, you're not going to need to worry about that because it's a dry dough and there's quite a bit of flour, as you could see when I was mixing it. You're not going to have any problem at all. I mean, they will very, very easily come off. If you are going to be using parchment, as I'm sure that you know, not only does it prevent sticking, but it also encourages more even baking. So it's definitely an option if you want to, but it's definitely not needed for these as far as sticking goes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The other last one that I wanted to show you of the cookies, I'll just take some of the short dough, and this one's super easy. So I have some leftover trail mix, literally the bottom of the bag of trail mix, and some chocolate chips that I found in the back of the cupboard that had already been opened. So a really easy way of making a really tasty cookie is just taking some of your scrap dough, and you can do this with like a variety of products. You can use coconut, you can use anything that is not going to change the actual texture of the dough. You're not going to want to be adding something wet. You're not going to want to be adding something like jam, but anything like this that is just going to be incorporated. It's a super easy way to just make another kind of cookie. Okay, and then once these are, that's kneaded in, just be careful you don't over knead it, because remember you're going to develop the gluten when you're doing that, which you don't want. It'll end up a very tough cookie if you do that. So then all you're going to want to do is roll them into balls and then flatten them. If you have a cookie stamp, which are kind of fun to have, this would be a good example that you could just stamp the cookie stamp on the top, which puts a design onto the top of it. And because this has no leavening, it's going to stick right there through baking. So that's like a really fun option too. Okay.
Mary, is this a dough that you can freeze?
What's that?
Is this a dough that you can freeze?
Oh, definitely. This freezes really, really well. The recipe, actually what I made is only half of a recipe. So you can see how much you can get from it. The recipe that we'll be sending out is going to be twice this amount. So you can very easily, at the beginning when I divided the dough into a disc, you can just make 2 discs if you want, put 1 disc in the freezer and keep 1 disc to use right away. But it is a really, really great dough to freeze. The next product that we're going to be making is some tarts, which I think are really, really fun to make. I tried to make the tarts using equipment that most people are going to have at home. There's a lot of really cool like little tart shells out there. Some of them are false bottom with little fluted edges. They're beautiful. Just a ton of variety out there, but a lot of people might not have them. So I just wanted to keep it really simple, and I thought most people are probably going to have a muffin pan. And they actually make really, really elegant tarts by using just a plain muffin tin. The other thing that I'm going to be using instead of anything to cut out as far as a cookie cutter, I'm just going to be using a glass. Again, I'm just trying to make it so everybody can do this. So what we're going to be doing is rolling out our dough again, and I will show you how to get it into the muffin pan. I'm going to use a little bit of the old dough and a little bit of the dough that I have not used yet. So I just am kneading it slightly so They're two different temperatures to make sure that it's well incorporated. Okay, so again, lots of flour. Make sure it's really well coated. And this time we're probably gonna be rolling it out to, last time was a 1/4 inch, a little bit thick, or a little bit thinner than that. This time it's gonna be a 1/4 inch and possibly a little bit thicker than that. Cookies are gonna be thicker than the tart shells, just so these are easier to handle. All right, again, continue rotating the dough. Okay, want to make sure it's not too thick, because when we put them down into the muffin pans, we don't want them to bunch up too much. Okay, so just about there. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to get the glass. Okay, and we're just going to do 4 today. And so you can probably see I have greased and floured 4 of these. You know, no problem doing all of them, but we're just going to do 4 for today's demo. Okay. So really easy. We're just going to take one of these, gently put it down into the muffin tin. And if you feel like your hands are getting a little bit hot, because, you know, there's butter in here, a really good way to sort of form this so it gets down into the corners without getting too soft is actually just taking a little piece of your scrap dough, and you can go ahead and push that down into the corners like that. And it is going to bring it down there really nicely without adding any heat and softness. Okay. And
Mary, we had a question come in about whether you recommend actually buttering and flouring the tin, or if spraying the tin has the same effect.
I actually butter and flour. That said, there are plenty of times, like professionally, I've used the spray and with equally good results. I find that the spray can add, because there, you know, you don't have as much control over how much product is actually going into the pan. I find that I like the control of how much fat I actually put in here. So I have no problem doing that. It's just personally at home, I would never do this at work because it's just too time consuming. But either or should be fine. Okay. So those are down there. We're going to be blind baking these. And blind baking is going to be putting a little piece of parchment, a little piece of foil, whatever you have on hand inside of these little shells in each one. And then what I usually use is rice, or I use dried beans, or a combination of those as my pie weight. The nice part about doing that, you know, you always usually kind of have like a leftover partial bag of some kind of rice or some kind of beans. And it's a really good way of using it up, and you can just keep reusing it. You don't have to get rid of it. Once you bake it off, you can just put it aside and just reuse it every time you blind bake something. So these we're going to be baking. I'm not doing these two as far as putting in the, putting in the rice, but I would if I was baking them. These we're going to be making at 350 degrees for approximately 20 minutes or so. I just want to show you when it is done, it's going to have an appearance like this, and this is for the blind baking. You can see that's a little bit golden on the top, but there is like a little bit of translucency. This is perfect for blind baking because we are going to be rebaking it again, okay? So for purposes of this demo, I don't have any pre-baked. We are going to say that these are all pre-baked as this little sample is, and I'll use this right here. And I am going to be filling these today with what we call a frangipan. A frangipan is basically like an almond cream. It's made with a fat, usually butter, and some kind of a nut flour. There are lots of different options for filling these. This is just the one that I'm going to be using today. I'm also going to be making a pastry bag that I can pipe it out. You don't have to do this. You can very easily just use a spoon, but it's kind of interesting to see how you can make a pastry bag pretty easily with just a triangle of parchment paper. You're just going to take, do it on the side. You're going to take your points on each end and bring them up to the point in the triangle. This one wraps around, comes up here as well. You just tighten that up so you have a nice tight tip there, and you fold this over. Okay, I usually fold this back so I have a saved tip. Like I said, you don't have to do this. You can just easily spoon it in. But once you get the hang of this, it's actually a lot easier and a lot quicker than trying to spoon it in. It's just neater too. So this is the consistency of the frangipan. So it's very pipeable at this point. There's also eggs in here, so it is going to be setting up as it bakes. Okay. So we close up the bag. And we just cut off the tip. Again, I just want to remind you, we are pretending that these have been blind baked, okay? Just as a reminder, blind baked just as this one has been. So we're just going to be filling these, really just the bottom. Okay. Just like that, bottom of each tart is going to be covered with the frangipan. And this kind of is the fun part because you can really let your imagination run wild with the of scraps that you have at home. Let's see. Okay. So I'm going to do one. I've got some leftover coconut that's actually been in there for probably 6 months. So some coconut, maybe a few chocolate chips in one. I had some blueberries that I was worried I wasn't going to use, so I stuck them in my freezer. And this is like a perfect way to use these up because frangipan, the almond and the blueberries are really good together. You can just put a few of those in one. Again, I've got my trail mix. You can put the trail mix in one. You can even, if you want to, soak this in a little bit of rum or something to soften up. Your dried fruit would be really nice. Let's see. And this one, what I might actually do, I have some leftover, tiny bit of leftover almond butter here. You can even drop a little bit of almond butter in the center. And then I have some leftover salted caramel topping and just a dollop of that on top of the almond butter. Okay. And then let's see, we'll just do one plain chocolate, the last one. Okay. So at this point then, these are going to be baked. Remember, they've already been baked until you had that really nice browning. Now they are going to go back into the oven and be baked approximately 20 minutes or so at 350 degrees. I'm going to be showing you all the products later, but just to let you see what they will look like when they are done. They've got like a really beautiful, nice little brown bottom to them. And the frangipan will actually bake and set. This was actually one that I did with the almond butter and the caramel before, and this is the trail mix that I did before. So a really good vehicle for using up little scraps of things. You definitely don't have to use a frangipan in this. You can use a variety of things. I mean, you can use a frangipan, you can use a custard, you can use, even if you want to just completely bake your tart shells empty after they've been blind baked and then put in whatever nut butters you might have, you know, you can do that too. The possibilities are really endless with this. Okay, and the last one we're going to be doing is the Pop-Tart, which this is, I find this one like a fun project. I love it when they come up with products that have been like a little bit campy in the past, and now they come up with, you know, a really much nicer version of them where the ingredients are actually quite good. It makes a world of difference. The other thing that you can do with Pop-Tarts, which we're not doing today, is make a savory pie dough instead of this sweeter dough that we are using, and make a savory Pop-Tart with your leftovers or anything you have hanging out in the freezer. You can use, you know, sauteed vegetables. You can use cheeses with anything you want. It's just a really easy way to do something different with what you have on hand, either sweet or savory. Okay, so again, we're rolling out the same way. And we're looking at getting this to be approximately 1/4 of an inch again, a little bit on the thicker side of 1/4 inch as opposed to the thinner side. Little bit thinner. Remember, you're going to have a double layer of this. So it's going to be a fair amount of dough, but you do want to make sure that it's not going to fall apart on you too. Okay. So what I'm going to do with this, cut off the edges. Okay, and we're just looking at doing 6 squares. We're going to be doing 3 Pop-Tarts right now, and make them approximately 3 by 5 inches is a good size. I'm just going to eyeball this, but you can, you know, definitely measure it too. Okay. So we have the bottom and the tops. Square that one up a little. Okay, so in these you can do, again, just things that you have in your refrigerator. I have some leftover jam that I'm going to be using in one, which is really good. This I would just like spoon in there. You don't want to go overboard in filling these because they will explode on you. So you think you want a lot more goodness in there, but try to have some self-control because it'll come back and bite you. As you can see, I'm like leaving myself a nice little border around there. Another one I'm going to be doing right now. I've got some peanut butter that I have left over. It's the end of a jar here. So we'll put some peanut butter in. Okay, and just sort of spread it out a little bit. It'll spread out during baking. But again, leave yourself a little bit of a border. Okay, and with these, I'm gonna just sprinkle like a little bit of chocolate chips on these two. Okay. Another one that I'm going to be doing right now is just like a cinnamon sugar. I mean, just like the old Pop-Tarts used to have cinnamon sugar. All you have to do is make a mixture of some cinnamon, some sugar, and a little bit of flour, and you're going to get the same result. So I have some cinnamon and sugar that I've already mixed up with the flour, and we're just going to put some in. There we go. And what we're going to do is very, very lightly put a little bit of water on each side. Just be really careful that it stays on the dough. Mine might have gone off the dough a little bit there. I only say that because it can make it hard to pick up off the counter. We will see. Okay. And this is just going to go on top. And you're going to seal that in really nicely. And again, if you use a savory dough, just regular pie dough, whatever pie dough you like to use, do it exactly the same way. And you can obviously put some sweet items in a savory dough as well. There's no issue there, but you can also just make a really nice savory Pop-Tart. Okay, just to make sure this is completely sealed, I'm just going to press it a little with the fork. And because my water did go over like a little bit, like I was worried about, just sticks a tiny bit. So just put a spatula underneath and you'll get it right up. Okay. And the last thing that you want to do is make sure that you poke some holes in the top of this. Otherwise, the steam is probably going to make this come apart. So just put some tiny little holes. Okay. And then I'm just going to put these on the same sheet pan, but again, obviously these are going to take a much longer bake time than the other items. So they should, when you're actually baking, be baked separately. But again, it's going to be 350 degrees. For these, it should probably take between, I would say 20 and 30 minutes, depending on the heat of your oven. Okay, so that is, I said, one dough that we were able to really utilize quite a few things that we have in the refrigerator, in the freezer, and they look like totally different products. The different types of cookies we have, the Pop-Tarts, and the small individual tarts. Many other applications for short dough, but it's a really good way, like I said, just a very neutral base to be able to utilize a lot of the products that you have. So if you did have any other questions about the short dough, that would be a great time to do it, would be now.
Let me just see if any others come in. I've been trying to ask as questions come through, so I think we may have answered most of them. The only one remaining is, how long can you freeze the dough and have it still be workable?
You know, it really should be able to freeze, I would say at least a month. It probably could go longer than that. I hesitate to do it much longer than that because it can start taking on, you know, like a little bit of a freezer flavor to it after, you know, opening and closing your freezer over the course of time. But I mean, at least a month, and most probably double that. It's a really hearty dough. And I said, you're not worrying about any kind of leavening that's going to become inactive. You can just rest assured that when you take it out, it should be acting exactly the same way as when you put it in.
Great. Okay.
Let me just get this cleaned up super fast so we can start on the next project. So the next thing that we are going to be working on is sourdough, obviously. And sourdough is just, it's a wonderful, fun project. It is also one of those things that's more of an art form than it actually is a science. I mean, you keep hearing about, you know, baking being a science, which it really is a science in addition to an art form. But as far as starters and sourdough starters in particular, there are just so many ways that you can do this successfully. I'm going to be showing you the way that I do it, and you could probably go online and find 5 other different ways easily to do this. So there's definitely not a right or wrong way, and believe it or not, some products are going to act differently in different kitchens because of the humidity you have and because of the temperature of your kitchen. So, you know, different types of sourdough maintenance will work differently for different people. So just to talk like a tiny bit about sourdough, I will get my starter out. I purposely did not feed my starter yet today. So it is hungry, and I thought you would like to see, those of you that have not done a lot of starters. But sourdough is a type of pre-ferment, and it adds a unique flavor as it leavens as well. The starter is commonly made of flour and water, and it actually traps the wild yeast that's present in the air. And the wild yeast is especially prevalent in kitchens where a lot of baking takes place on a regular basis. The thing about a tiny amount of commercial yeast can actually be added to boost your starter after the first few days if you don't see much action, not a lot of bubbling. I mean tiny amount, maybe a pinch of commercial yeast will sort of get it going and start attracting yeast the way that you want it to. Normally you don't have to do that, but that's a way to get it going if you have to. The acidity in the sourdough pre-ferment is really due to the long fermentation. You're going to, those of you that have done sourdough before know that this is, you know, sometimes it's 10, 15, 20 years, even 100 years. You can have starter if you keep maintaining it properly. And so throughout that time, acidity develops. And this acidity affects not only the flavor, but it produces a denser texture that when you think of a sourdough bread, a true San Francisco sourdough bread, it's going to have that denser texture. And it also results in a longer shelf life and better keeping qualities. So as I said, this is my starter. Usually when I do a starter, you can start it with like equal parts of just flour and water and mix it up. I would definitely use though an organic unbleached flour. It's going to make the world of difference if you can get your hands on it. I know that right now it's a bit tough, but it makes a huge difference as far as the quality. You don't necessarily have to feed it that the entire way through. It would be great if you could, but at least to get it started, an unbleached organic flour, just a white flour would be fine. Another really good option for starting a sourdough starter would be a rye flour. They are super good at starting. And then, you know, eventually you start adding your white flour or your whole wheat flour or whatever. Throughout this process that we've had as far as shelter in place, the last few months, I've had this starter going. And I have not had the same kind of any kind of flour because I can't get it. So I basically just feed it what I have available at the time. And I've definitely noticed there's some flours that it really likes better than other flours. And I'm going to feed it one of its very favorite flours today for you guys. But I've also used, if I could only get like a bleached flour, which I don't like getting, I've even added that to it and it's done the job. It's definitely not as happy, but it does the job. So what I want to do right now, the first product that we're actually going to be making with this requires what they call, you know, what you would normally throw out each day or utilize in some other way before you actually feed it, the discard. And so what I'm going to do right now before I feed it is actually get my discard for the first recipe. Okay, so my recipe calls for 1 cup of discard. So before we feed this, we'll just take 1 cup of this out. I'll stir it up first. It can start separating a little bit. All that is basically like a byproduct of the natural yeast in there. You can see even by, I don't know how well you can see this, but even by just stirring it around, it's starting to become activated. Okay, so we'll take this out and reserve it for later. For one of my favorite recipes. And we're gonna go ahead and feed it. Okay, so lots of different ways of feeding it. What I do on a regular basis is feed 1 cup water, 1 cup flour. Right now, this is the flour that the starter is loving. It's just a pastry flour. It's a whole wheat pastry flour, and it's very light, so it's not really adding much of a whole wheat element to it. But whatever is in there as far as those natural ingredients, it just absolutely loves it. So you just go ahead and mix that in and go down with your spatula because you're trying not to have any lumps. And
Mary, we had a question come through about how frequently you should feed. the
It is
starter?
fun also to take a little bit of your starter once it's established and just keep some in your fridge. There you go.
Hey, Mary.
Which you only have to feed it once every week or so in the fridge. So it's much, much less effort doing it that way. This you have to feed once or twice a day. I'm using this most days, so I have been keeping it out and just feeding it. There you go.
Hi, Mary. Can I interject with a question?
Yes. Sorry, it's like really
frequency?
hard to get the audio in this. Okay, go ahead.
What is the frequency with which you recommend feeding the starter?
The recommended frequency is actually once every 12 hours. That said, because of the issue with finding flour at times these days, I've been feeding mine once a day and I've had no problem at all. If you keep it in the fridge, once a week is fine. A starter is very, very forgiving. I mean, you can, as long as it does not get moldy. You also want to change the bowl. I would say every couple days, change it into a different bowl and give it a nice clean bowl to start over again. It's just a really nice clean product. And so it's just this wonderful product that you can use instead of yeast, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you about this today, because yeast can be a little bit difficult to find. But definitely once a day if possible. If you forget it a day or two, which I actually have forgotten mine a day or two, and as I said, it's super forgiving and you can come back and feed it, it most probably will be just fine.
Okay, and just a note, Mary, can you hear me still?
Yes.
Just a note that we are having a lot of questions coming in about substitutions.
Okay.
So we may want to just do maybe 2 of the recipes for this section so that we can make sure to get to that substitution section.
Okay. Okay. Maybe what we will do then is, let's see, I will give out, or I was going to do 3. I was going to do the a sourdough pizza crust, some sourdough crackers, which I really love, and a sourdough bread. So maybe what I will do is leave off the sourdough bread and we'll just do the pizza crust and the crackers, and then we'll still send out the recipe with a good explanation for the bread itself.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so we are going to start with the sourdough pizza crust, which is like a really easy recipe to make and does not require yeast, which is one of the reasons why I thought it would be good to do today. So the ingredients are going to be we're going to need 1.5 cups of starter, 1.5 cups of just all-purpose flour, tablespoon of olive oil, and 1 teaspoon of salt, which is already in here. Okay, so that's it. It is super simple, 4 ingredients. So all we're going to be doing is mixing together those 4 ingredients. Let me measure out my starter.
Mary,
okay,
one
and you'll
more
notice
thing.
that some recipes specifically call for a starter that has been fed. They usually refer to that as ripe starter. Sometimes they're going to be specifically calling for sourdough starter that is what they call discard, which is what I just measured out before. If it does not, they don't really, make any reference to it, I would just feed it and use it. I think you're erring on the side of caution if you feed it and use it. Okay, so I have my cup. I'm going to need 1 cup of starter, 1 cup of olive oil, and 1 teaspoon of salt, which is already in here. Okay, so all we're going to be doing is mixing together those 4 ingredients. and a half. And then we have the flour and the salt. And then I have 1 tablespoon of the olive oil. And when we're doing this, we don't want to build up too much gluten. For obvious reasons, we're going to be making a pizza dough with this, and we want to be able to stretch that pizza dough out. So I'm just showing you how we can do this without a mixer for those that don't have it. Okay, so I have most of the dry ingredients right now are hydrated, but it's definitely not a smooth dough yet. So I'll just turn it out. And because I don't want to incorporate any more flour into this than need be, all I'm going to be doing is just kneading this on the counter until it becomes a nice smooth dough. You don't want to go overboard because it's going to rest for 20 to 30 minutes and we want to be able to pull it out. So we don't want a lot of gluten development. Okay. So I would say that is it. You don't want to do a lot more than that. Let's wrap that, put it aside. And we're going to get into the sourdough crackers then, which are super fun.
Mary?
Yes?
We have had quite a few comments pleading to do the bread. So I think we should actually cover the bread just to make sure people have that guidance.
Okay. And, you know, if there are a lot of questions, while I can't guarantee that we can answer all of the questions, I mean, after the workshop, I can go through and see the ones that are repeated quite a bit, and we can, you know, do our best to send out quite a few answers on Tuesday too. Okay, so the sourdough crackers, one of my favorite recipes. Number one, it's only 4 ingredients again. It's all-purpose flour, sourdough starter, olive oil, and salt. So basically the same ingredients that are in the pizza crust, just a completely different ratio to those ingredients. This is a very easy recipe that, again, you do not need the mixer for. So we have our sourdough discard that we measured out before. We have the flour. I put the salt in here already. And we have the olive oil. Okay. So all we're going to be doing is mixing these ingredients together. And the resulting dough is just, it is just a really lovely dough to work with. The fun part about these is there's no waiting. I don't have to wait anything for the dough to relax. I don't have to wait for anything to rise. You just put it together. Okay, I've got all of my ingredients in there. We're going to mix it, and then right away we're going to roll these out. And it's just a really fun dough. Yeah, the amount of, because it does have a whole cup and a half of the sourdough discard, it just has this wonderful kind of spongy feeling that is super easy to work with. So I'm just going to get that out. We'll knead it a couple times. You can see it's like a fairly loose dough. We just want to make sure everything's incorporated, but then stop. Again, I don't have any flour down on the table. Okay, that should do it. Easiest way to work with this is we're going to cut this dough in half. And at this point, I am going to put a little bit of flour down on my parchment. And I want to press this out into a nice rectangle. Okay, and we're just going to roll this out. And we want to get these, they're crackers. So think about, you know, you really don't want a lot of thickness to them. Another option with this is actually adding like different types of flours. I would stick to, for this particular one, a flour that does contain gluten, because we would not be able to roll it out like this if it was a non-gluten flour. It would be much more difficult, but you could do a whole wheat flour. You could even add a little rye flour if you want. The reason why I like this, again, is because you can top this with whatever you want. You can use fresh herbs, you can use dried herbs, you can use a little bit of sea salt. You can make some olive oil with some garlic, and these are fantastic with hummus. Or even just eating on them their own. They're pretty addictive. Okay, so as you can probably see, this is like super thin. I would say probably a 1/16 of an inch. I don't really have a problem if there are like sort of uneven edges on this. I think it's sort of a rustic cracker anyway, and so I'm absolutely fine with that. But I'm going to be cutting these into crackers that are approximately, let's say like 1.5 inches by 2. Okay. And I'm going to just brush this with a little bit of olive oil really lightly. Okay. And again, anything that you want to go on the top of these. You can even just use a little bit of sea salt would be fine. I have the tail ends of some Mediterranean seafood seasoning from Whole Foods, but there's actually really cool stuff in it with sea salt and garlic and thyme and black pepper and sage and fennel and onion. So to me, this is like the perfect thing to put on here. And it's a way to use this up. This smells really good. Okay. These are going to be baked at, what are these? 350 degrees, and it's going to take about 25 minutes for these. What you're looking for, I'll show you when that's done. Okay, you're looking for some nice color to it, nice golden color, and there's not any translucency to the dough. If you're looking at it and you see a little bit of translucency, just put it back in the oven. It's better to go a little bit over than under. Okay, just a personal preference. I do prefer these the second day they're made. They're super easy to make, and you have them ready, and you saw how little time it took me, and another 25 minutes and they're gonna be done. But for some reason, I feel like the dough is sort of a more pleasant texture the day after. You can definitely eat them the same day, but so there we go. The last thing that we are going to be doing then is the sourdough. And I'll do this as quickly as possible. Okay. Just have to rinse one bowl. Okay. Okay, so for our sourdough bread, we are going to be using an all-purpose flour for this one. You can definitely use a bread flour. I just don't happen to have any, and so I'm trying to just show you what we can do with the ingredients that we do have on hand. First of all, what I'm going to be doing is putting basically all of the ingredients in at the same time. Okay, so we have our flour and our salt. I have some water that I've already measured out. There is an option if you do want to put a small amount of yeast in this. Any sourdough bread, there's going to be that option. So automatically, if you go strictly with your starter, I don't know if you can see this or not, the bubbling, but this is super happy right now. Seeing it just had its favorite meal. And for this recipe, I actually measure out the sourdough starter. So I just have a digital scale. Okay, and this particular one is 6 ounces.
Mary, for those who might not have a scale, is there another way to approximate the amount of starter to add?
Yeah, there is. And when I send out the recipe, what I can do is actually just convert it to volume measurements. A lot of the professional recipes have weight measurements only because they're a lot more accurate. But when I go ahead and get the recipes ready to send out, I will just go ahead and make sure that I send it out with the volume conversion to it.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so we're getting a dough hook for this. And all of those ingredients were just dumped in there. And we're just going to start mixing. I'm glad we're doing this because I really wanted to show you the stages of what you're looking for when you mix a bread. There are very specific stages that it goes through in the mixing process. Just to let you know, those of you that don't have a mixer, you can do this by hand, okay? You are going to have what is called, when you're done here, what we refer to as a short mix, okay? So just do a little bit more, and I'll show you what a short mix would look like. Best way to sort of figure out the type of mix that you have is pull what we call a gluten window. A gluten window is taking just a tiny bit of the dough out throughout the mixing process and trying to stretch that as thin as you can. This is actually surprisingly not bad already. Yeah, this is a little bit more. If you see how it's tearing, that means we're not quite there. That means that the gluten has not developed quite enough. So we're just going to give it a tiny bit more, and we're going to be just about at a short mix.
Mary,
Yes.
for people who might not have a mixer, this portion would be kneading. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Your initial incorporation of ingredients can be done in a bowl. Once it gets too hard to spoon, with a spoon, then you would just be turning it out on the counter. Yeah, but definitely it can be done on its own. Most breads can. That's the beauty of bread. So I don't know if you can see this or not, but what we're looking for is there are going to be some segments of this dough that is actually opaque and some that's translucent when you stretch it out.
Could you put your hand down a little bit?
Yeah, so when you,
perfect.
I don't know if you can actually see it, but if you hold it up to a window and have the light come through it, you can see it. So when it is a short mix, meaning the gluten, it's not necessarily tearing, but the gluten isn't completely in a developed network yet, you're gonna have like 75% of this window being an opaque look, and you're gonna have about 25% of it being translucent. Okay, that is what we call a short mix. If you're doing this by hand, you know that you could either stop there or you could actually continue. The next stage, this is gonna go through, is called the improved mix. And you'll be surprised at how quickly it goes from stage to stage and the gluten develops. Once we get to the improved mix, it's going to be about 50-50, okay? 50 opaque and 50 translucent. That's where you're going to want to stop, okay? If you go past that, you're getting into what we call an intensive mix. Think of egg breads, think of white breads, think of challahs, anything like that that has a very tight crumb. That's the crumb you're going to be getting into if you start over mixing it at this point, okay? So you're looking for, as I said, approximately 75%, 50% translucency and 50% the opaqueness, okay? So I'm going to take this out now and just knead it a little bit by hand to smooth out the dough a tiny bit. Sourdoughs are usually going to have like a super long fermentation time or rise time. This particular one has no yeast in it. As I said, if you want to add a little bit of yeast, little, I mean like 1 teaspoon of yeast, that is fine. It'll give it a little bit of a boost, but it's not needed. Okay, so we're nice and smooth there. We've just put it into a nice ball. This is going to, I'm going to put some oil in the bottom of this pan, put it in there, put some oil on the top of the pan. This is going to stay at room temperature for 3 hours. One time during that 3 hours, I might just sort of give the dough a tug, turn it over on itself, which is called a fold. At that point, I usually put it in my refrigerator overnight. The refrigeration retards the growth of the natural yeast. In the morning, you take it out, let it come to room temperature. It'll probably have like another 3 hours or so. So you would take it out, let it come to room temperature for, maybe half an hour or so. Do your final form of it. And after the final form, just let it sit there for, possibly 3 hours, 4 hours, depending on the temperature and the humidity in your kitchen. I actually, one thing that I wanted to point out here that I have ready for you guys is this, which might look really, really odd in like a baking demo. But as you might or might not know, sourdough has that beautiful, like crusty, bubbling crust to it normally with that beautiful color. That is really the result of having a steam oven, a professional steam oven. Most of us do not have a steam oven. I certainly don't. But I have rigged up this way of pretty well replicating that burst of steam that you would have. These breads are going to be baked at 450 degrees. So when you turn your oven on, I just have like some really big nuts and bolts here. Really hefty ones so they will retain heat. When I turn on my oven to 450, I put these in the cold oven on the bottom shelf. So these are gonna get super, super hot. Immediately before me putting my bread in the oven, I'm gonna score my bread, and I'm gonna have a pitcher of ice on the side. So I open up my oven, my bread is already scored. I put the bread in, I pull this out, I'm gonna dump the ice on it, immediately put this back in quickly and close the oven. And what that ice does, it gives you enough of a delayed reaction to be able to have the burst of steam once the door is closed. I happened to do this yesterday, and I took a video of it because I knew it was something that we would not be able to do. It's just like a 2 or 3 minute video showing how you do that process at the end as well as the scoring. So I will make sure that I get that to Jess, and she will get that out to anybody who is interested in learning about that. Okay, so here we have our sourdough. It was made yesterday. It had its initial fermentation for 3 hours at room temperature. After that, it sat in the refrigerator overnight. I removed it from the refrigerator probably 3 or 4 hours ago now, and I've formed it almost immediately once it warmed up a little bit. And at that time, it was probably about half of this size. So it's been sitting at room temperature now for about 3 or 4 hours. And so at this point, it's ready to go in the oven. You can see the gluten structure, which was super tight this morning. When I actually touch it now, it's leaving an indentation. So to me, that is signaling that this is ready to go into the oven. The first thing that you want to do is score the bread. Okay, and just to let you know, I just want to go over, first of all, I spoke yesterday about the nuts and the bolts in the pan. So I have my oven heated right now to 450 degrees. And as you can see, I have my pan in the oven with all of the nuts and bolts. So those have been in there the entire time. They are super hot right now. Also, I have my ice ready to go, okay? So at this point then, we want to go ahead and score the bread. The scoring of the bread is not only decorative, but it also assists the bread in oven rise. Really, a lot of bakers, their scoring is almost like a signature for them, and their identification that this is a loaf of bread from a certain bakery. We're just going to do something very simple today, and that's going to just be 3 side-by-side scores. This is pretty well-proof bread, so I'm not going to go too deep. If you have bread that has not had its full fermentation time, and the gluten structure is a little bit tighter, you might want to go a little bit deeper so it'll open up in the oven. Alternately, if it's an overproof bread, you're not going to go quite as deep because you don't want to deflate the bread before it goes in. So we are just going to be doing 3 perpendicular cuts in the top of the bread. If you go at an angle at all, that is fine, but just be aware, instead of getting an oven rise, it very well might be opening up from an angle, which is fine. It's just going to be a different look. Okay, so I'm just going to do 3 with a razor blade cuts, and you want to go pretty quickly. Okay, once you do your cuts, you're pretty much going to want to start, just make sure this one's all the way through. You pretty much want to put it in the oven right away. Okay, so I'm going to open the oven. Let me go ahead and put this in. Okay, that goes in first. Then let's go ahead and pull this out. Be careful, there's going to be some steam. Okay, done. Okay, so what that is doing is actually, to some extent, creating the steam that you would have in a professional oven. It works a lot better for me as opposed to just having a hot pan of water at the bottom, because it is going to create natural bursts of steam, which I could hear, and now it's died down. So that is very similar to what you'd have in a professional oven. Anyway, this will be in there for 25 to 35 minutes.
and we will see how it turns out.
All I wanted to say, I'm not going to go into the actual topping of this because we're running out of time, but this is our pizza dough. It needs like a little bit more rest time to let the gluten relax. All we're going to be doing with this is pulling it out onto either a sheet pan or a round pizza pan or a pizza stone. Top it with whatever you want. It's going to be a 500-degree oven, and it's only going to be like 7 to 10 minutes as far as bake time goes. So really good pizza dough. Again, no yeast. You can play around with the flour in that a little bit. But what I wanted to do before we went away to the substitution portion is just sort of put out what we've done today so you can see what you can actually do with what you have on hand. Okay. Just cover up some of that flour on there. Okay. So these are the products that we made with the short dough. These are the crackers that we made. Again, you can just eat them plain. They're great with a soft cheese, or they're also fantastic with hummus. And last but not least, the sourdough bread. So as I said, it's like pretty amazing what you can actually do with, as I said, I did not go and buy anything. I didn't even have yeast. And that's just an example of some of the things that you can do. So, hello. There we go. Okay, let me get this a little higher and then we can talk about, Jess, did you want me to talk about substitutions or did you want to ask questions? What would be the best use of our time?
Well, just a note that we did have quite a few questions about substitutions around gluten-free flours. And so if you could touch on that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, let me just do that one quickly now. Gluten-free flours, the challenge with them is no two products are going to react the same to a gluten-free flour. So it is really hard to have like a hard and fast rule that, you know, okay, you use a rice, you know, whatever flour and it's going to be fine. Use an almond flour for this and it's going to be great. Use a rice flour for that, it's going to be perfect. It really is dependent upon the other ingredients in the recipe, and it's dependent upon what your finished product is going to be, whether it's going to be a quick bread, whether it's going to be, you know, a yeast kind of bread. So what I use as a general rule, if it is going to be a quick bread type, you know, anything meaning quick bread, like, you know, baking soda, baking powder, then I would definitely try one of those all-purpose flours out there. Bob's Red Mill actually is a really good all-purpose flour. I've had a lot of good luck with them as far as for quick breads. A lot of times I developed an oat challah recipe, gluten-free challah recipe. And it took me a lot of going back and forth into like different flours to see, you know, what would actually work. So I ended up using like a combination of like a gluten-free ancient grain as well as like an oat flour and like a little bit of the gum in there, and it actually turned out it's a really good product. But a lot of it is going to be trial and error, and I know that's probably not the answer that people really want. They want to be able to know. What I would suggest, two things. If you want to do good baked breads, pastries, anything, what I would do is sort of more go towards recipes that are not made for gluten flours, that are more made for gluten-free flours anyway. There is a really good book out there called The Alternative Baker, which I've gotten some good ideas from. And I would suggest going into, like reading through some of those recipes, and you're going to see like a lot of different ideas for some really interesting flours. Another super resource for gluten-free flours is a book called Flavor Flours by Alice Medrick, who is local. She used to own Coco-Lot in Berkeley. And she has this incredible book on these gluten-free flours, not only going into a ton of information about each flour and its uses and the qualities that the ending results are going to have, but she also has some really good recipes in there too. So you're using recipes that are geared towards gluten-free anyway, as opposed to taking a recipe and trying to turn it gluten-free. So I hope that helps, but it's just, it's a very complicated subject to be able to cover super quickly. I wish I had more time, but hopefully that's helpful.
Okay. And I know you had a couple of prepared subjects you were going to talk about around alternatives for butter or different fat substitutions, different dairy substitutions. I will just know we are at 11:30, but I think you can still go into those topics.
Yeah, I mean, I can stay for another 10 minutes or so if people are interested. It won't take any longer than that. It shouldn't. As far as fat substitutions go, obviously, like the main fat we're talking about here is butter. And I mean, butter provides tenderness to a product. It provides flavor to a product. The thing that for me sticks out the most about butter is what they refer to as mouthfeel. After you eat something that has butter in it, you don't feel normally like you have a coating of fat in your mouth. And that is because of the melting temperature. The melting temperature for butter is actually, depends on the actual fat content. It has to be 80% to be considered butter in this country, but it can range. The better butters are going to have a higher butter fat content. But the melting temperature is going to be like 94 degrees. So it's cooler than your body temperature. So it melts very easily. When you get into margarine, which I don't really know that anybody uses margarine anymore, but that all of a sudden that melting temperature gets up to 100 degrees. Shortening, that can get up to lard. Some people still use lard for biscuits and things. That can get up to 115 degrees or so. So the reason I'm telling you this is because that melting temperature is super important when you're planning what it is that you're going to be baking. Think about a biscuit. Usually, if you're if you're an experienced baker, you'll know what I'm talking about. You leave like pebble size chunks in your flour before you incorporate the liquid ingredients. Those pebble sized chunks of fat in that case are left there because every place there is a chunk of fat, once it gets to temperature, it's going to melt. It's actually going to act as a natural leavening. It's going to give you a flake. So the melting temperature is super important. I don't want to be too long. It's like I could do a 4-hour lecture on butter. But I think what you need to look for is what you're going to be replacing the butter in. Should tell you what you're going to be using in its place. I have come up with the consulting job that I'm doing right now actually is a dairy-free bakery. And so I have developed like my own dairy-free butter that, we're using and making on the property and using that. We use it like a coconut oil base, refined coconut oil, so it does not have the flavor of the coconut in it, with some soy milk and some soy lecithin, and we actually curdle the soy milk with, so it's a really cultured buttered taste. So there are other options out there. There are dairy-free products as well. I think Earth Balance is a dairy-free option. Again, it's like totally dependent on what product it is that you're making. The other thing that's important to know, in some recipes, especially quick breads, you can take at least half of the butter out, or half of the fat out, whatever it is, and replace it with a fruit puree, which is like a really healthy, flavorful option. What I would suggest if you are pulling out butter in a quick bread or a muffin, you are going to be wanting to replace, say, pull out a cup of butter, replace it with half a cup of puree. If it's an oil product that you're going to be pulling out, if the fat is an oil that you're going to be pulling out and it's a cup, then replace it with 3/4 of a cup. I will make notations of this in the notes that we send out just in case that you miss it. But it's a very flavorful way of replacing the fat altogether. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, 2 other things very briefly, dairy substitutions. There were some questions actually previously regarding the milk, and if you can replace milk with water or thin it out, you definitely can. Just to let you know what the milk does, it increases, the protein in the milk actually increases the crust color. That Maillard effect increases the color of your item. When you replace it with water, you might notice that it's going to be a little bit more on the pale side as opposed to a nice golden color, but the product itself is going to be the same. But long-winded way of saying you should be able to do that. Should not affect your item too much. As far as replacing milk with like non-dairy options, you can replace your milk with nut milks. Just be mindful of the fact that it is obviously going to be, imparting a somewhat nutty flavor, which sometimes is just what you want, but sometimes it's not as desirable. Soy milk, you are going to get almost an identical result. It's what I use at work now in the non-dairy bakery that I'm developing recipes for, and across the board I'm having no problem using soy milk. Oat milk, you can use oat milk, but it might actually affect the texture, so you might want to water the oat milk down a little bit. It might make it a little bit gummy and heavy if you use straight oat milk. Rice milk, again, super good option. Don't have to do anything to it, and you should have fantastic results. Very last thing I wanted to talk about are the leavening agents, baking soda versus baking powder. If they can be used interchangeably, not really. The example I like to give is something with baking powder would be, say, a cake, a sponge cake. And so you have that, the cakey texture to it. A very, normal recipe that you would be using baking soda in would be, say, banana bread. So you just look at, first of all, the texture and the differences between the 2 of those. They're going to be totally different. Chocolate chip cookies are going to be baking soda, so they're going to be that heavier. It also imparts some darkness to your product. You can interchange them too, but you're not going to have the same product. It's going to be a cakey chocolate chip cookie instead of like the dense chocolate chip cookie that you really want. The other thing that you have to be very mindful of is baking soda requires an acid in your recipe to make it activate. If you do not have an acid in your recipe, you might as well just completely omit it because it's not going to do anything. And the acid can actually just hide in places like the molasses that's in the brown sugar has acid. Honey, obviously, any kind of citric addition to it. But you do have to make sure that you have the acidity in there or nothing is going to happen. A little bit of vinegar is another way that you're going to be getting action from the baking soda. Baking powder already has usually tartaric acid in there, so you don't have to worry about it. It's a self-contained leavening. What else was I going to say? One more thing about that. The only other thing I wanted to say, baking powder, you're going to see single acting and double acting. Normally, double acting is what you're going to be seeing out on the market, but single acting is also available. Double acting, what it means is your baking powder is actually going to have a reaction twice. Initially, when you mix your product, you're going to probably see some rise and some bubbles if you leave it for a minute before you put it in the pan or whatever. It has a second rise time when you put it in the oven. which is super, because then if you do have a little bit of lag time between mixing your item and actually getting it in the oven, if you have something in the oven and it's going to be a few minutes, you can bank on the fact that you're going to have a second reaction from the baking powder, and not have any kind of an issue with the quality of the product. I think that was it.
Okay, so I think what we'll do now is just launch a poll about people's opinions about this workshop, and then in the meantime, I might just ask you a few more questions, Mary, that have come in as people are kind of completing that poll.
Okay.
So I'm going to launch the poll now. You should see it come up on your screen, and in the meantime, I'll continue to ask a couple of questions. All right, so the poll is launched. The first question is actually one that came in before the workshop, which is it best to use shortening or butter or a combination?
Oh, is this for the pie crust? I think this was for the pie crust.
Just in general.
Again,
question.
It's going to be depending upon what your actual product is going to be. If you're talking about a biscuit, or if you're talking about a pie crust, anything that the desired characteristic is going to be something that we would describe as flaky. That is the time, like, shortening just works wonders in your product. So what I would normally do, like the pie crust that I use, is my old workhorse pie crust, is actually a combination of the two, leaning a little bit more to the shortening, only because it's going to give you a much more tender crust. Remember those baking or those melting temperatures. It's going to take longer for the shortening to melt in your product. And so what that is going to do is create more flakes. So, if you're looking at a cookie, I would probably go more towards at least butter or at least half butter and mix the two of them. But there is not, in that case, any benefit in actually using shortening. You're going to get less of a spread with shortening because of that melting temperature than you would with butter. So I just prefer butter for that. But anything that you want a flaky, biscuits, scones, muffins, or not biscuits, scones, pie crust, those are the products that I would definitely consider, like, at least maybe half and half.
Okay. And then relating to yeast, active dry and rapid rise, how do you substitute one for the other? How do you substitute when you have neither?
Okay, just to let you know what they are, the active dry yeast, are the ones that you normally get in the strip of the envelopes. When they dry that out, it's a very, very harsh process in which they do it. So when you get that yeast, it could be as much as 25% dead yeast in that envelope, just because of the process. When you get either the instant yeast and rapid rise are sort of used interchangeably. They're basically the same product, but it's a much gentler way of actually drying out the yeast. So instead of having 25% of your yeast being dead, it might be only 10%. So that is why, it's not that there's anything special about it. It's just basically the drying process between the two yeasts. So what I would do in substituting as far as, swapping those out, say for every teaspoon of active dry yeast that you would use, I would only use, like, say, 2/3 of a teaspoon of instant and or rapid rise yeast. That said, is there a way that you can get by or just replace yeast altogether? That would be the sourdough starter that we just made, or any other type of pre-ferment. A lot of the pre-ferments do require yeast, so the sourdough starter is one of the few that does not require the yeast. And if you wanted to just bypass yeast altogether, then I would just go with the sourdough starter. There's really, unfortunately, nothing you can do. You have to either, for a bread product, it has to be either a commercial yeast or the wild yeast in our sourdough starter.
Okay. And then there have been a couple questions about egg substitutes. I know that's something that is can be hard to approach, but do you have a couple of ideas around egg substitutions?
I mean, it's, again, that's like one of those ones that's so specialized depending upon like what the final product is. I mean, you know, you use the psyllium seeds, we've used flax seeds. If I want to ever use, like say make a meringue, you can use like the water from fava beans and it actually will whip up. And you can incorporate that into, you know, like your recipe. If you need to have any sort of leavening, natural leavening, it can be like whipped fava water. I mean, aside from that, it's like such an in-depth thing. It's like very hard to go into in detail at this point. But I can, in our notes, if you could remind me just to put together some resources that I've used in the past that you could look into if anybody wants more information on it.
Okay, great. I think maybe the last question we have time for is what type of flour is best for pie crust? And I just also wanted to note that we will go over the remaining questions and answer a few of those over email if we see there are trends around those. So although this is the last we're answering live, we'll do our best to answer more over email.
I would say an all-purpose flour. That is what I would normally use. You know, just as a very quick overview of like the wheat flours, we talked a little bit about the gluten-free flours, but the wheat flours are sort of listed in according to gluten content. So it goes from a cake flour to a pastry flour to an all-purpose to a bread, and then a high gluten one, which is not as common, but it does exist. So your AP flour is all-purpose flour is like right in the center there. It usually, every brand is going to be a little bit different, but it usually has a gluten content of like 10%, which is like, to me, important when you're making a pie crust. If you use something with too low of a gluten content, when you go to actually start rolling it out, it's going to tear and rip and it's going to get really frustrating. So while a pastry flour might actually yield a more tender end product, it's also going to be much harder to roll out and keep from tearing. So I just feel like you need a little bit of the extra gluten that's in the all-purpose, and it's minimal. I think that depending upon the maker, again, pastry flour is normally between 8 and 9%. And as I said, all-purpose flour is 10%. So it's not a huge amount, but that little amount makes a huge difference when you're trying to roll something out.
Okay, great. I'm not sure if Ivana wanted to finish us off with any note about the Academy or...
Yeah, well, first I wanted to give a big thanks to Mary and Jessica for putting this workshop together. I think it brought a lot of really great ideas and resources forward, and also just a resourcefulness and creativity about it. I certainly learned a lot, so thank you, Mary, and also Brent, the IT person in the background, for helping us pull this off. My last thing that I wanted to share is a concluding slide with information about how you can find out more about our office and about the Sustainability Academy. Can folks see that slide, Jess?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So head to this website at the top. That's our Office of Sustainability website. And then for more information on the Sustainability Academy and upcoming workshops, the second website is there. You can easily navigate to it from our Office of Sustainability website as well. And then if you want to convene with the Sustainability Academy community, we have a Facebook community if you're on Facebook. I know not everybody is. But the last thing I'll leave you with before we jump into our holiday weekend is, if you want to sign up for listservs on our office, there's a little button on our website towards the bottom right, and you can subscribe about any number of topics, including climate change, the Sustainability Academy, energy conservation, etc. So that's a great resource for you. And don't forget about our sustainability hotline. You can call us anytime with questions about solid waste. So with that, thank you so much. Thank you for sticking with us and for the 70 people that tuned in with us today. It was a pleasure to be with you all. Thank you.